In yesterday's video, we spoke about a short-term downside pivot on Tuesday's low, which was effectively the 4-hour price action pivot from yesterday's video that, if violated, which indeed it was, did initiate some downside short-term targets. Now, while I am talking about short-term things here, of course, the higher-term timeframes are, more or less unchanged. And as we going over a little bit later in this video, there are some very, very compelling setups for the more long-term. But before that, I have a big face reveal after my surgery, and now I'm not only the most young man, but I'm also the most beautiful man with just one eye, and also the hairiest man as well. And I accept the challenge for today. We'll be looking at this chart with one eye barely open. I guess I trans into an Asian now, so fair enough. Anyways, looking at Bitcoin here, first sort of thing I want to acknowledge is, again, that 4-hour price action pivot for yesterday's low, or sorry, it was on Tuesday's low, but during yesterday's video, was indeed violated at about 108,500. And now that price action pivot has switched around to a bearish price action pivot, which is effectively Wednesday's high at just below 110,400. So as long as Bitcoin's below there, we do expect a bit of a short-term corrective period. And that begs the question, what are the areas of interest to the downside for at least bounces and perhaps even reversals as well? So looking at the daily time frame, again, the area of interest that I'd be marking off right here would effectively be that yellow 21 EMA, which is 106,300 or so at current rate. So somewhere around there, give or take a few bucks from that number. I would be expecting a bit of a bounce attempt if Bitcoin does get down around there. I suppose if you are a little bit more on the optimistic side, maybe that is going to be the next higher low. But if that area does indeed fail, then we do have another target further south. And that is still based off of a setup that we actually brought up. It was last week and still relevant here because it hasn't closed. And this is a very, very simple setup, just looking at that red moving average cross into the downside of the yellow moving average. And whenever we've seen that, there's been about an 80% probability of coming down to that green moving average, which is basically at around Thursday's low, last Thursday's low, that is. So while Bitcoin did, play out a nice downside move from that initial entry, it did not fulfill the closing conditions for this particular setup, meaning that, if Bitcoin does fail below about 106,300, that's the next sort of natural area of interest, which is, again, effectively like last Thursday's low. Anywhere around there is fair game. And naturally, the longer that Bitcoin takes to kind of come down to that region, this green moving average will be pulled up. So, if Bitcoin continues to go sideways here and plays out a bit of a short-term bounce and, just chews up some time, then this will, start to rise up and up and up. And, perhaps in the next week or so, it gets up to like 102 or even more, I suppose, as well. So do keep that in mind. But that would be the next sort of area of interest, again, if that 106,300-ish region does fail with a closure below on one of our higher term timeframes. But here's the thing: while I am looking for a bit of a short-term correction here, especially as long as Bitcoin is now below that 4-hour price action pivot that we just marked off right here, again at 110,400, there are still higher term timeframe setups that do supersede these lower term timeframe things. And I want to bring you back to the stablecoin dominance chart right here, because there's one really compelling thing that we did not necessarily go over on yesterday's video, or we haven't gone over this one in a while, but this is a 3-week time frame. And again, very, very high term time frame here. So these things take a long time to play out, but this is very obviously a chart that wants to go to the downside. It's a bearish fucking chart. We do see a silver cross to the downside. We do see an overall downtrend, and we also do see hidden bearish divergence on this last high, which was put in at the end of March. So with that in mind, I do look for this one to come down somewhere close to these lows that we saw from January and then March of last year, which were effectively, the last couple major highs for Bitcoin. And that would naturally imply that it's, it's going to take some time. I mean, if I were to estimate it here, if it were to happen like at the fastest rate possible, it probably still takes like 2 to 3 weeks 2 to 3 closures, which on a 3-week time frame is 6 to 9 weeks, or 69 weeks, perhaps. 6 to 9 weeks. So that's, that's a long time, to be honest, but that's still the general trajectory, especially as long as it's below this bearish price action pivot. Downside is the more likely thing. So you do have momentum oscillator, you do have trend, and you do have bearish price action pivot. Those are the main things that I wanted to point out there. And then, of course, as we went over in yesterday's video, we still have this potential for regular phantom bearish divergence on the weekly time frame. This one will be closing at the end of this week, so it's going to be a lot more prescient than the 3-week time frame. But if the stablecoin dominance chart chart closes anywhere here or lower, then yeah, that will fire off. And again, we expect the stablecoin dominance chart to effectively play opposite of Bitcoin and effectively the rest of the cryptocurrency market, as this is, in my opinion, a much more accurate chart than what everyone seems to be completely fucking obsessed with, which is the tether dominance chart, which does matter, but it's like, why are you just looking at tether dominance? Why not look at all of the stable coins? Because that would perhaps be a little bit more accurate, I suppose. Anyways, moving on from there, let's now go over something new over here, because I did want to acknowledge that the 5-day time frame, looking at the HPDR reset setup, essentially looking for the contraction phase and volatility matching up with a meeting of that meeting on the 5-day HPDR. That actually happened already. We spoke about that last Thursday when that did get confirmed, but I want to acknowledge here now on the 5-day time frame, the median is now acting as resistance, as Bitcoin did open up below the median, meaning that if Bitcoin can actually reclaim that median, which is also exactly in alignment with the 4-hour price action pivot right here, which could probably front run based off of the 4-hour time frame, well, that does open up the door for a pretty epic extension of this rally, I suppose. As you can see now, the 38.2 levels coming in all the way at $125,000. Keep that number in the back of your mind, because that will pop up a little bit later as well. And of course, to the downside, if Bitcoin continues to reject right here, where does the 38.2 level to the downside match up with? That's effectively 98,000 and change. So we could say that if Bitcoin were to continue below and fail again below that 106 level, we would be looking somewhere between the green moving average here, which is again effectively last Thursday's low, and about $98,500. That would be kind of my area of interest for the next potential major bounce, and likely higher low if Bitcoin is going to maintain its bullishness more long term. It's really fucking hard, by the way, to see my notes with just one eye. Like I feel like that guy Crazy Eyes from Mr. Deeds is like trying to see on both screens, but I can't because I only have one fucking eye. Jesus Christ, man, this is really difficult. I have a lot of respect for blind people after this, man. Anyways, yes, okay, so we spoke about that. Oh yes, all right, let's check in on the meta signal setup, because this one it got pretty damn close to the first target, yes, but certainly has not hit it officially just yet, and is effectively back down around the entry. The entry was 107,550. Is this one going to be a failure? Well, definitely possible, but of course it is not considered a failure until it actually closes below the stop loss area right here, which is 104,350. So, fair enough. If you did take a trade like this, then, you can always trade these manually as you see fit. So perhaps you did take a little bit of profit at 110. But should be said that target number one does have an over 70.5% probability to be hit. So, that is pretty fucking high. I mean, yes, it did get quite closer, but it did not officially meet that. So that condition has not been met. Again, just because it has a 70.5% strike rate to win doesn't necessarily mean it's 100% strike rate, which should be fucking obvious to anyone with the goddamn brain. But you can't expect that on the interwebs. You can't even expect people to have two eyes as well. Like myself, also brainless too. Anyways, yeah. So my point is that if you're playing the setup over here, it's technically not closed just yet. In fact, it's technically still in profit, to be honest. But I would say I would start to express a little bit of concern with this one. Again, breaking that 4-hour price action pivot low from yesterday's video, in my opinion, was significant, and that does imply that Bitcoin probably tries a little bit more downside. So, I'm looking at this one. Yes, those are high probabilities, but again, 70% not the same thing as 100%. Effectively, that is almost a 30% probability to fail. So it does indeed happen, and fair enough. Again, you can trade these as you desire. You don't need to close or open, for that matter, exactly where the card is suggesting. But if you are looking for setups like this, you can find a link in the description below for Meta Signals, which has a suite of all sorts of signals like this. They even have like a crazy deal going on right now as well. If you sign up with the code CROWN in all capitals, I think they'll give you like 1,000 shitcoins for an exchange called what? But I know everyone loves their shitcoin exchanges. But it is a decentralized exchange. It actually is pretty good. But anyways, yes, okay. What I wanted to point out here, however, is that if Bitcoin were to flip around and continue, again, how would we effectively define that? Bitcoin needs to pop back up above Wednesday's high, which would fulfill this condition right here, and also fulfill this condition right here, reclaiming the 5-day median. Well, target number 3 is lining up with that next sort of major area of interest here on the 5-day HPDR, giving us a range between 120 to 125. So if that were to happen, obviously rally still on, big explosive move, but personally, I do think downside, again, in the short term is more likely, especially when we go ahead and reference our momentum offset right here from our higher term timeframes. Daily time frame is still headed up, but as whenever I see something like this where it's heading up and Bitcoin hasn't really broken a range or anything like this, I look at that as a bit of a reset. And ultimately, the longer here that Bitcoin just does not reclaim that 110 or so high, the more and more that this is going to eat up time and turn back down, effectively indicating a continuation of this corrective phase. The 2-day time frame is going to be continuing. Actually, this one is not crossing down just yet, but tomorrow it will cross down if Bitcoin does close below 107,500, which it's not so far away from right now. The 3-day time frame is obviously going to continue down as well. This one just closed last night. The pivot is 108,200. The 5-day time frame is also positioned to the downside as long as Bitcoin's below almost 111,000 bucks. That one's again not closing tonight or tomorrow, but it's actually closing on Saturday night. And then of course we got the weekly, which is now pivoted at 106,550. So do be aware of that. If Bitcoin does start to fail, this correction could drag on for longer and lower. But I suppose this next sort of segment of the market is going to be pretty fucking annoying, to be honest, and even more annoying because I can't see very well right now. And now that I recognize it, if you recall, this falling channel that we looked at from the price action pivots indicator, which was resolved to the upside and hit the intended target, this was based off of the break. I think it was actually over the weekend. Yeah, last Saturday. When we look at the extension now, the topside boundary is coming in around that green moving average. So that's also going to be an area of interest, whenever Bitcoin does approach, and obviously that gets marched down the longer that it takes, but wherever that sort of intersects, again, I'd be looking for at least a little bit of a short-term bounce. Maybe even that is the next sort of major higher low. But like I said, all of this, in my opinion, is effectively getting ready for that next major higher low, because this chart right here is the one that I think really gives the major bias towards the general direction of this market. And as long as this one is still angled to the downside, I'm still going to be looking at general upside. But, like we said, this can take easily like 2.5, 3 months perhaps. So, it takes a bit of patience. And in the meantime, that means that Bitcoin can spend a lot of time trading sideways and being corrective. So be aware of where those pivots are. I am going to hopefully fix my face situation soon. Holy shit, man. This is actually really annoying to be honest. But also kind of fun. Taking a shit ton of pain pills and talking to peoples of the internets about magic internet money. And with that said, we're going to end it right there. Take care, much love, and see you hopefully next time.